My mother and father both died of cancer. My dad had lung cancer and my mother had bone cancer. Yet I never worried about cancer. I was always so busy taking care of everyone that I didn't think I could ever have cancer. I used to drive 100 miles round trip every day to take care of my mom so she could stay at home. And out of the 6 girls, there were 4 of us that were close enough to do that. 2 of us would take the night shift and the other 2 the day shift. Then we would switch the next week. We did this for 6 months. I'd take care of my family, make sure they had food fixed, keep my house clean, and go to my mom's to stay all night or all day, whatever the shift was.
Well, cancer didn't run in my family to begin with, so I was never really worried about it. I was having some health problems, so I went to the doctor, and he said you need further testing. He also made an appointment for a mammogram because it was almost time for one anyway. After I had the testing done, I went back to his office. The doctor came in and shut the door, and I thought right away, what are you doing that for? Then he said, I don't have very good news. And I said, what's going on? He said, it looks like you need a hysterectomy. That really didn't surprise me because my mother had one, and I thought a lot of women have those. So I said, okay, and he said, I want to send you to a doctor in Morgantown for a second opinion. So he scheduled an appointment for me.
I am a Weight Watchers junkie. I have stopped and started Weight Watchers 10,000 times. But in 2005, I just decided that enough was enough. And for some incredible reason, I stuck to it this time, and I lost 40 pounds. Just like that. I came home one evening, went in and took a shower, and when I put on my nightgown, I thought there was something on me. Truly, I thought there was something on my nightgown, so I kind of wiped it off, and I felt something. I yelled for my husband and said, what is that? He touched the spot, got kind of a scared look on his face, and said, maybe you better call the doctor. That was on a Monday. Tuesday I called the doctor. Wednesday I saw the doctor. You see, I have a strong family history of breast cancer. So anytime there is an issue, my doctor sees me right away. I found this spot because I had lost weight.
About 3 or 4 years after my mom died, I was getting ready for bed one night. My husband was brushing his teeth, and I went ahead and climbed into bed. I rolled over, and I felt something that was kind of like a knot. I thought, oh, that feels funny. But I didn't say anything to my husband, and every day for a week I kept checking my breast, and that knot was still there. So I called and made an appointment with my doctor. They got me in the next day. The doctor examined me, but I could tell he was going to feel it the way he was examining me.
My doctor reminded me that this was February and I had just had a normal mammogram in October. But he said there was clearly something there. My grandmother, all of my aunts on my mother's side, my mom, and 2 of my older sisters have had breast cancer. Because of this strong family history, he didn't want to take any chances. I had had a few biopsies in that area, so we figured it was just scar tissue. Anyway, both of my kids played in the high school band, and they were taking a trip to Disney World. I had never been to Disney World in my whole life, and I wanted to go with my kids. I planned on chaperoning, although I don't know what I was thinking, being on a bus with 70 teenagers for 23 hours. The doctor said, take the trip. Go down there and enjoy yourself. We'll do the biopsy when you get back.
I had the appointment for the mammogram at 1 o'clock at the hospital. The girl came back and said the doctor wants a couple more pictures. I thought, oh no, and I thought, well, don't worry about it till you have to. The nurse called and said the doctor wants to see you. Can you come here now? I said yes. I don't have my car today, but I don't live very far, so I'll be there in a few minutes. I got down to his office and the nurse met me at the door. She took me right into his office and sat me down and shut the door. I didn't like that. But I'm still not going to worry about it until I have something to worry about. Then the doctor came in and plopped himself down and said, I don't have very good news for you today. He said the mammogram showed an abnormality in your breast. I couldn't feel it, the doctor couldn't feel it, and the doctor at the hospital couldn't feel it. He said I needed to see a surgeon. So he made an appointment for me to see the surgeon on Friday.
I usually say, "You're the doctor. I'll do whatever you think is best." But something told me that day that I was not going to leave the office until he knew I had a lump. I knew it wasn't in my head. I had felt it. After I got dressed, he came back in and reminded me that I had had a mammogram 7 months ago. He said, "I know what you're like, and I know you wouldn't panic and want to see me if something wasn't wrong. So what I will do is write out an order for you to have another mammogram just to ease your mind." And I went over and said, "Doctor, may I have your hand for a minute, please?" He looked at me. I took his hand and put it right on that lump. And I said, "Now what is that?" He tore the order up and he said, "I'll go out and make a phone call and get you in as soon as possible to get another mammogram." He said, "I'm sorry."
My older daughter had a lot of moles on her back. Right after Christmas, when she was 29, she noticed a mole on her bicep that had changed form and it had darkened. So she went to a doctor that was not an oncologist, and he just took it off and told her not to worry. But 2 weeks later, it was still not healing, and then she was diagnosed as having third-stage melanoma. It was in the lymph nodes. I went to Johns Hopkins with her. She was going there to talk to a doctor about treatment, and she said to me, "I don't want you crying in front of everybody." So I sat there through the appointment thinking that my heart was going to burst. But I managed to wait until I was on my way home before I started crying. I couldn't stop crying. My eyes were swollen and puffy, and I couldn't see anymore. So I pulled into a local mental health facility. I went in and told them about my daughter. They got me started on a program right away to help me through her cancer treatment. I was teaching at the high school, so after school I would go to a counselor 2 or 3 times a week. I needed help dealing with this.
I was in the hospital the next Wednesday for a biopsy. The doctor came in the room that afternoon, and thinking I was asleep, he said to my husband, "Have you told her?" I thought, "Oh no, the gig's up." So I pretended I didn't hear, and he said he'd come back. Before I talked to him, it was like being in a deep, dark hole that you can't find your way out of. When the doctor came back, he sat in a chair across the room, and he said, "We need to take the breast off." And I said, "When can you do it?" He said, "We can either do it tomorrow morning, or you can go home and come back next week." I said, "Well, maybe I'll just go home and I won't come back." He jumped up out of the chair like he was shot out of a cannon. He came over and he said, No, you've got to do this." I said, "Let's do it tomorrow then."
I came back from Disney World and the doctor said, "Let's do an ultrasound just to see what's going on." He didn't seem worried, so I wasn't worried. This was on a Wednesday. Well, the little girl, now I say little girl because I'm noticing the older I get, the younger the nurses and technicians look. So this little girl came in to do my ultrasound, and when she finished, she said, "Do you have a few minutes?" I said, "Sure." I'm sitting there, and in walks in the radiologist. Now, they don't usually come and talk to you, so I kind of knew I was in trouble. He said, "Look at this," and he put my films on the wall. I said, "Well, that doesn't look real good. What is it?" It was a mass of something. He said, "You need to see a surgeon." He said, "Wait just a minute." And when he came back, he handed me a card and said, "You have an appointment with him on Friday." Well, I knew when he made the appointment, I was in some trouble.
Counseling helped me get through my daughter's treatment for melanoma. When we were all together for a family baptism, she and I have said, "I have something to tell you. I have breast cancer." I thought, "I am so old, God, give it to me." Naturally, I cried through the whole thing. She said she had to fly back to Kansas and go through breast surgery. The cancer deep, but it was small. It wasn't fast growing, but because the melanoma, they did chemotherapy. As a family, we got a calendar and we took turns helping her. My son was there with her when she was going through chemotherapy. One day she was in the shower and he heard her crying. He asked her what was wrong. She said, "I'm washing my hair and it's all coming out in gobs." Things like that were so tough on her and tough on us.
The next day, they removed my breast. After I'd been home a few days, I looked out the window and saw my dad's farm truck coming across the meadow. He parked in the front yard, and I wondered what he was doing here. He came in, and I asked him where Mom was. He said she couldn't get ready to go, so I left without her. I asked my dad what in the world he was doing here. He said he came over to check on me, to see if I was all right. I told Dad I was all right. He stayed overnight and left the next morning before anybody was out of bed. Psst, he was gone.
The doctor was concerned because the knot was so large, and I had just had mammograms 7 months ago. Because that mammogram hadn't shown anything, he was very alarmed. They did an ultrasound and sent me to a surgeon. He did a lumpectomy and told me I would have the results in a week. When my husband and I went to see the doctor, he came in and sat down. I was hearing him say that it was like he was telling someone else, "You have breast cancer." The doctor was crying, my husband was crying, and I was feeling sorry for somebody that had breast cancer. It didn't register that I was the one with the breast cancer.
The surgeon said, "I think you're okay, but we'll just get that mass out of there. No big deal." I had that biopsy on a Tuesday, and that Friday I was back in the doctor's office. I was sitting on the table, and my husband was standing nearby. I don't know if any of you ever watched the TV show Walker, Texas Ranger. That's one of my all-time favorite shows, and I've always said that my husband is my Walker, Texas Ranger. We could be stranded in the woods somewhere, and he would make sure that I survived. The doctor came in, looked at me, looked at my husband, and said, "You've got cancer, kid." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "You've got cancer, kid." He sat down and got very emotional. And he said, I should not have to say the word cancer and the word kid in the same sentence. Then all of a sudden I looked over at my husband, and he wasn't looking too good. And I thought, what is going on? The doctor said, "I don't think you heard me. You have cancer." Then I remember I kept saying, "Okay, okay, and okay." My hands were shaking so badly. I don't think they ever have shaken like that. He said, "I need you to see an oncologist." About that time I heard a noise and looked over at my husband, my Walker, Texas Ranger, my rock and my hero, and I think he was going to pass out. I just kept saying, "Okay."
I saw an oncologist a few weeks later, and he said I could have chemotherapy or not. It was strictly up to me. The doctor left the room so that my husband and I could talk about it and decide what to do. My husband is a pacer, which drives me crazy. It makes me really nervous. He paced back and forth in front of me. Finally, he said, "We're going to do chemotherapy." I looked at him and said, "Now wait a minute, this is my body. Don't I get some say in this?" And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. What do you think?" I said, "Well, look at it this way. If I don't do chemo and the cancer comes back, we'll always say I should have done it. If I do chemo and it doesn't come back, then maybe we're safe." So we did chemo for 6 months.
I couldn't quite understand why my husband was so upset. And then I found out later that the oncologist my doctor recommended was his mother and father's oncologist, and they had both passed away of cancer. The doctor told me my only option was a mastectomy. The oncologist was to see me Monday. So on the way home, and I remember this very clearly, I said to my husband, "Now listen, I've got to say this. If I die, you make sure they have coffee at the funeral home for my family. My whole family drinks coffee, so you make sure they have it." What? Exit that out. He said, "Okay." I also said, "I don't mind if you put flowers out because I like flowers, but sometimes they make me stuffy. So would you please put a Benadryl in my coffin?" He could tell I was serious, so he agreed. I know he must have thought I was a crazy woman.
I think that it really hit me when I walked into the kitchen and I knew I had to tell my boys that I had cancer. It was the hardest thing. Everything happened so fast. I went to see my oncologist. The nurse told me I could get a wig before starting chemo because I would probably lose all my hair after the first treatment. Sure enough, 11 days after my first treatment, I was completely bald. I lost every hair on my body. I had good days and I had bad days. When my neighbors and friends at church would bring me food into the house, even the smell of food made me very sick. They couldn't even heat up food in the microwave. If they wanted to heat up food, they would have to put something under the door and close it. I didn't eat, and I guess I just didn't expect them to eat either. This went on for 4 months.
We went home that afternoon and waited for our kids to come home so we could tell them their mom had cancer. My son did okay until my husband started to cry. My son is quite outgoing, kind of a big tough guy, so for him to break down was rough to see. My daughter, my precious little girl, looked at me and said, "Are you going to die?" Now I had vowed never to lie to my kids, so I said simply, "I don't know. I don't know if I will or not. But you know, if I do, I have taught you right from wrong and good from evil, so you'll be okay."
My daughter got through the breast cancer treatment. Believe it or not, she was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. She had to have her thyroid removed and go through radiation treatments. When my younger daughter was taking care of her sister, she noticed some of the same symptoms her sister had. She went to the doctor to get results from an x-ray. She had growths on her thyroid and had to have biopsies. My mother had just died. I was at the funeral home when my sister-in-law burst in and said my youngest daughter did not have cancer. We were always there for each other, and I think this has made us a stronger, more loving, more caring family.
About the time I was starting to feel good, it was time to go back for my next treatment. I had one little grandson at the time. He didn't even know what I looked like without hair because I wore a turban. When I took it off, it scared him and he cried. I felt bad about that. A couple of days later, he came up and his head was all shaven. He did it for me. He wanted to be like me.
I arrived at the hospital the morning of my surgery. I was sitting in that room all by myself thinking, you know, I have gone through all these stages of grief. The sadness, the madness, being scared, making deals with God. All of a sudden, I looked up at the clock. It was 8:31 in the morning. This overwhelming sense of peace came over me. I don't know why I looked at the clock, but I did, and it was 8:31. When I went out, I must have looked different because my husband said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "You know, I am okay. I mean, like, really okay. I've got cancer, but I'm okay." He said, "What happened to you in there?" I kept looking around, kind of looking behind me and above me, and he said, "What is the matter?" And I said, "Do you see something?" I kept seeing something right behind me and right above me and around me. I kept saying, "Nobody sees anything there," and no one else saw it.
We did chemo for 6 months. The doctor told me I could stop at any point if I didn't feel